The room is too quiet for a place where pain is supposed to be fought. Cold, fluorescent light presses down from the ceiling, bleaching every color out of the walls, out of the sheets, out of the body lying motionless at the center of it all. The air smells sharply of disinfectant, a smell that clings to the throat and refuses to leave, as if reminding anyone who enters that this is a space where weakness is no longer hidden. Machines hum softly beside the bed, their rhythm steady, indifferent, counting something invisible, seconds, breaths, or whatever remains. On the narrow hospital mattress, a frail figure lies half sunken into white sheets that feel far too large. Each breath is an effort. The chest rises slowly, then falls, as if unsure whether it should try again. The sound of oxygen slipping through plastic tubing mixes with the dull beeping of monitors, a mechanical lullaby that offers no comfort. Her eyes are open, fixed on the ceiling, unfocused, carrying the distant look of someone who has been awake for far too long. They blink occasionally, heavy with exhaustion, heavy with memories that no one else in the room can see. Her hands, once expressive, now rest limply by her side. Veins stand out beneath thinning skin. Even the smallest movement seems to cost her something. Nurses pass in and out quietly, their shoes squeaking against the floor, their voices lowered out of habit rather than hope. They check numbers, adjust tubes, scribble notes. None of them linger. This is not a place for conversation, only maintenance. There was a time, so distant it now feels almost unreal, when that same voice could silence a crowd with a single note. When stadiums vibrated with applause and joy rose like heat from thousands of bodies moving as one. The woman on this bed once stood tall beneath blinding stage lights, her presence impossible to ignore, her sound larger than fear, larger than politics, larger than pain. But none of that echoes here. The hospital walls do not remember applause. They absorb suffering and move on. Illness has a cruel way of stripping a person down to essentials. Fame means nothing to an IV drip. Awards do not ease the ache that settles into bones at night. Royalty checks cannot negotiate with failing organs. Now there is only the body, betraying itself day by day, and a mind forced to watch from the inside. Visitors come less often. The world outside keeps turning, loudly, impatiently, while time in this room barely moves at all. At moments, her lips part as if she wants to speak or sing or protest the injustice of it all. But no sound comes. The effort would be too much. Instead, her gaze drifts again to the ceiling, tracing cracks and shadows, searching for something solid to hold on to. The machines continue their calm, relentless counting, marking each fragile breath with quiet precision. Only then does the weight of the truth settle fully into the room. The woman lying there, reduced to whispers of movement and measured breaths, is Yvonne Chaka Chaka, the same woman who once made an entire continent sing along. Now trapped in a silence so complete, it feels almost violent. Only now does her name return almost reluctantly, as if even it feels out of place in this room. Yvonne Chaka Chaka. There was a time when saying that name meant light, movement, noise. It meant stages that stretched wide and crowds that refused to sit still. It meant sequined dresses catching the glare of spotlights, microphones warm from constant use, voices rising to meet hers from every corner of the arena. Back then, she did not wait for silence. She commanded it. A single step forward, a breath into the mic, and thousands would hold still, listening, ready to follow wherever her voice led them. that past feels almost cruel when placed next to the present. Now the stage is a narrow hospital bed. The lights above her are harsh, fixed, unforgiving. Nothing like the ones that once made her glow. Instead of applause, there is the soft click of medical equipment. Instead of music swelling behind her, there is the sharp sting of needles, the cold touch of metal instruments, the constant intrusion of hands that do not ask permission because they cannot afford to. Her body, once strong enough to dance through entire sets without rest, is now so light it seems barely anchored to the mattress. The contrast is not poetic, it is brutal. She once stood at the center of attention, perfectly upright, shoulders back, breath full and confident. Now she cannot sit up on her own. Once she traveled across borders and continents, welcomed as a symbol of strength, resilience, pride. Now her world has shrunk to a room measured in steps, to a ceiling she knows by heart, to a window she rarely looks through because it reminds her of distance she can no longer cross. There is a specific kind of humiliation that comes with illness, not loud, not dramatic, but deeply personal. The loss of privacy, the dependence, the way dignity erodes quietly when your body refuses to cooperate. For someone who spent a lifetime in control of her voice, her movements, her image, this surrender is not just physical. It is existential. Fate does not argue. It does not explain. It simply takes. She had reached a place many only dream of. The top of her field, the peak of recognition, a legacy already written into history. And yet, here she lies, betrayed not by scandal or failure, but by her own failing body. There is no villain to point at, no mistake to correct, just a slow, relentless descent from everything she once embodied. Sometimes her eyes close, not in sleep, but in exhaustion. Sometimes they open suddenly, alert, as if memory has startled her awake. Perhaps she sees flashes of the past, crowds waving, hands reaching out, voices chanting her name. Perhaps those images hurt more than the pain in her chest, more than the ache in her limbs. Because memory, unlike illness, does not fade gently. It arrives whole. The world still knows her as powerful, as untouchable, as a symbol. But symbols do not need help to turn over in bed. Symbols do not feel the sting of antiseptic on fragile skin. The woman lying here does. And the distance between who she was and who she has been reduced to is not measured in years, but in breaths, each one heavier than the last, each one quietly asking how someone who once stood so high could end up this low, with no clear reason, no warning, and no mercy. Pain no longer arrives as a warning. It comes unannounced, slipping into the room in the middle of the night, dragging her awake from shallow sleep and pinning her back to consciousness. The darkness offers no mercy. When the lights are off and the world outside has gone quiet, her body becomes louder, more demanding, more cruel. A sharp pull here, a deep, dull throb there. Sensations without clear borders, spreading slowly, like ink soaking through fabric. She lies still, afraid that even the smallest movement might invite something worse. Her body no longer listens to intention. Thought and action have separated. She thinks about lifting her hand, and nothing happens. Or worse, it happens halfway, trembling, unstable, before falling back onto the sheets as if embarrassed by its own weakness. The hands that once moved with purpose now shake even when resting, fingers twitching lightly, as though arguing among themselves. Holding on to anything, a cup, a rail, even another hand, requires concentration that leaves her drained. Speech has become a negotiation. Words gather in her mind, clear and complete, but by the time they reach her lips, they dissolve into something thin and fragile. Her voice, once steady and commanding, now breaks easily, reduced to a whisper that seems surprised by its own sound. Sometimes she stops mid-sentence, breath lost, eyes closing briefly as if to recover from the effort. Silence fills the gap, heavy and awkward, and no one rushes to fill it. Her eyes tell the rest of the story. They no longer search the room with curiosity or intent. Instead, they drift, unfocused, staring past people rather than at them. There is a distant look there, part fatigue, part resignation. At times, a flicker of awareness sharpens her gaze, as if she has suddenly returned to the moment, only to fade again seconds later. It is not sleep. It is not rest. It is the mind retreating because staying present hurts too much. Night stretches endlessly. Sheets cling to skin that feels too sensitive, too exposed. Every position is uncomfortable, yet changing positions feels impossible. She lies caught between wanting relief and fearing movement. Sweat forms despite the cool air, her body unsure how to regulate itself anymore. When pain spikes, her face tightens involuntarily, jaw clenching, brow furrowing, not dramatically, but quietly, the way people do when they are used to suffering and no longer expect sympathy. This is not a single bad day. It is a cycle without clear edges. Pain fades slightly, then returns. Strength appears briefly, then vanishes. Hope rises cautiously, only to be corrected by reality hours later. Her body has become unfamiliar territory, unpredictable and hostile. What hurts most is not the intensity of any one moment, but the knowledge that relief is temporary and effort is always punished. There is a loneliness in physical pain that words rarely capture. Others can see her lying there. They can hear her breathe, but they cannot feel the way her body resists her at every turn, the way exhaustion settles deep inside her bones, the way even existing feels like work. So she endures quietly, eyes half open, hands trembling, voice barely there, carrying a pain that does not scream, but never, ever lets go. Loneliness settles in quietly. It does not announce itself the way pain does. It simply stays. The hours stretch long on the hospital bed, broken not by conversation, but by sounds that do not belong to her. The echo of footsteps in the corridor, the distant squeak of a trolley, the murmur of voices fading as quickly as they arrive. Doors open and close somewhere down the hall. Never for long, never for her. Each sound reminds her that life is still moving just beyond these walls, continuing without pause, without hesitation. Visitors are rare now. At first, there were promises. I'll come tomorrow. I'll call. I won't forget. Time passed. Days blurred into nights. Promises thinned out, quietly disappearing the way enthusiasm always does when it is no longer convenient. When someone does come, the visits are short. Polite? Careful. People stand at a distance, unsure of what to say to a woman whose strength once intimidated them and whose fragility now makes them uncomfortable. Most days, it is just her and the room. The hallway outside becomes its own kind of torment. The sound travels easily. Laughter from a nurse, a hurried conversation, the clatter of shoes against tile. Voices echo, then vanish, leaving behind a silence that feels heavier than before. She listens without meaning to. She counts the pauses. She learns the rhythm of the hospital better than her own heartbeat. Every echo is proof that she is still here, and yet somehow no longer part of anything. Being alone like this does something to a person. It bends the mind inward. Thoughts grow louder. Memories return uninvited. She remembers rooms filled with people calling her name, hands reaching out, faces lifted toward her as if she were essential. She remembers feeling needed, irreplaceable. And now, the contrast is unbearable. The woman who once could not walk through a building unnoticed now lies still, unseen, hours passing without a single familiar face. There is a particular cruelty in being forgotten while still alive. Not erased all at once, but slowly. First fewer calls, then fewer visits, then silence that stretches so long it begins to feel intentional. She does not blame anyone. Blame would require energy. Instead, there is a dull understanding. The world has moved on, and she has been left behind, paused in a moment that no one else wants to witness. Sometimes she turns her head toward the door, reacting to footsteps that never stop outside her room. Sometimes her eyes linger there longer than they should, as if expecting someone to suddenly remember, to appear, to say, "I'm here." Most of the time, no one does. The door stays closed. The hallway noise fades. The waiting continues. It is in these moments, when pain is quiet but loneliness is loud, that the weight becomes almost unbearable. Not the illness, not the weakness, but the absence. The realization that applause fades faster than suffering, that admiration is loud, but loyalty is fragile. And somewhere in the stillness of that room, the question hangs in the air, unanswered and unforgiving. When the stage lights go out, who is left? The silence around her is not empty. It is dense, layered, pressing in from every direction. It fills the room more completely than sound ever could. There are moments when nothing moves, not the curtain, not the door, not even her own body, and in that stillness she simply exists, breathing slowly, eyes open, absorbing the weight of everything she does not say. She does not cry out. She does not complain. There is no dramatic collapse into despair. What remains instead is a quiet endurance that feels heavier than any outburst. She has learned, slowly and unwillingly, that suffering does not require noise. It only requires time. And time, here, is abundant. Yvonne Chaka. Chaka lies there, awake, listening to her own thoughts echo louder than the machines beside her. Fear settles in gently, without sharp edges. It is the fear of not knowing what tomorrow will demand from her body. The fear of waking up weaker than the day before. The fear that this version of herself, the one confined to a bed, dependent, unseen, might be permanent. She does not speak these fears aloud. Giving them words would make them real in a way she is not ready to face. There is exhaustion that goes beyond the physical, a tiredness that lives behind the eyes, that dulls reaction and softens emotion. She stares ahead, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours, suspended between memory and uncertainty. Thoughts drift in fragments, flashes of who she was, questions about who she is now, and a future that refuses to take shape. The not knowing is its own kind of torment. Acceptance, when it comes, is not peaceful. It is quiet. It arrives without comfort, without relief. It is the understanding that fighting takes energy she no longer has, that resistance has limits, that some battles are not lost in a single moment, but slowly surrendered to, day by day, breath by breath. She does not announce this surrender. She carries it silently. Like everything else, at times her eyes close, not to rest, but to retreat. The world has become too demanding, too loud in ways that cannot be heard. When she opens them again, there is a faint confusion, as if she needs a moment to remember where she is and why. The room feels unfamiliar, even though she knows every detail of it. The ceiling, the light, the distance to the door. Nothing has changed, and that realization brings its own quiet dread. She is afraid. Not in a way that shows. Not in a way that invites comfort. Afraid in the private, internal sense, the kind that tightens the chest and leaves questions unanswered. Afraid of being forgotten. Afraid of becoming a version of herself she does not recognize. Afraid that the strength people once admired was never meant for this kind of test. And so she remains still, silent, enduring. Not because she is brave, and not because she is resigned, but because there is no other way to be. In the hush of that hospital room, surrounded by unanswered questions and a future blurred beyond recognition, her greatest struggle is not pain or weakness or loneliness, but the quiet, relentless task of continuing to exist when certainty has completely disappeared. Fate does not negotiate. It does not pause out of respect. It does not recognize names, legacies, or applause. It moves forward with the same indifference for everyone, and here, in this narrow room, that truth feels unbearably clear. There was once a belief, quiet, unspoken, that success offered some kind of shield, that years of being admired, celebrated, relied upon might count for something when the body began to fail. But lying still beneath the sterile light, it becomes obvious how false that belief was. Fame cannot slow a weakening breath. Recognition cannot steady shaking hands. No amount of love from the past can convince a body to heal when it has decided otherwise. The glow that once followed her everywhere has no place here. It cannot soften the ache that settles deep in her frame. It cannot reach into her chest and restore what has been taken. In this space, she is not a symbol, not an icon, not a voice that once unified millions. She is simply a human being, confronting limits she never imagined she would face this way. The cruelest part is how quietly it all happens. There is no dramatic collapse, no singular moment where everything breaks. Just a slow erosion. Strength fades. Independence slips away. Certainty dissolves. Each day takes something small but essential, and none of it can be bought back with status or remembered glory. What remains is the uncomfortable realization that the world admired her power, but it cannot carry her through this. Outside these walls, her name still holds weight. It still sparks recognition. Somewhere, her music still plays. Somewhere, people still smile when they hear it. But none of that crosses the threshold into this room. None of it keeps her company through the longest nights. None of it eases the fear that creeps in during the quiet hours before dawn, when the future feels particularly fragile. This is the part no one prepares you for. The moment when everything you built proves unable to protect the one thing that matters most. When achievement feels distant and almost irrelevant. When the body becomes the final authority and it refuses to be persuaded. There is no lesson being taught here. No moral to extract. Just a life colliding with its own vulnerability. Just a woman discovering, too late and too painfully, that admiration does not equal safety, and legacy does not equal mercy. In the end, the spotlight fades, the cheers fall silent, and all that is left is the same fragile human condition shared by everyone, famous or forgotten, facing fate alone, with nothing to stand between them and its quiet, irreversible advance. Afternoon light slips quietly through the narrow window, thin and pale, stretching across the floor before climbing the edge of the bed. It does not warm the room. It only marks the passage of time. Outside, the day continues. Cars move. Voices rise and fall. Life insists on itself. But none of that enters here. Inside, everything remains suspended. She lies still beneath the sheets, her body barely outlined now, as if it is slowly fading into the bed itself. Her eyes are half closed, not fully asleep, not fully awake. That in-between state has become familiar. Breathing comes steadily, guided more by habit than intention. Each rise and fall measured, careful. The machines beside her maintain their quiet rhythm, filling the room with a sound that is neither comforting nor alarming. Just constant. Always there. Always counting. Nothing dramatic happens. No sudden movement. No final words. Only the smallest signs of life. A faint shift of her fingers, the subtle tightening of her jaw, the slow flutter of eyelashes responding to light. The woman who once filled vast spaces with sound now occupies as little space as possible, conserving what remains. Even presence feels fragile. The shadows lengthen as the sun sinks lower. The light on the wall changes color, then softens, then begins to disappear altogether. The room grows dim, but no one rushes in to turn on the lamp. She seems untouched by the change, as if time no longer belongs to her in the same way. Hours pass without meaning. Evening arrives quietly, respectfully, as though afraid to disturb her. In this stillness, memory feels close, but unreachable. The past exists somewhere beyond the walls, intact, untouchable. Here, there is only the present moment, stretched thin. The bed, the light, the sound, the waiting. Everything else has already slipped away. She remains there, eyes closed now, face calm but unreadable. Not peaceful, just quiet. The kind of quiet that settles when all resistance has been exhausted and nothing more can be asked of the body. The machines continue their steady breathing beside her, patient, indifferent, faithful. And perhaps that is what lingers most. The image of a life once lived loudly, now reduced to this single frame. A woman lying motionless in a white room. Afternoon light fading, surrounded by silence that feels heavier than any applause ever did. Maybe the most painful thing is not the illness itself, but the way a brilliant life slowly folds inward, unnoticed, ending not with noise or farewell, but in stillness, between four white walls and the even, unbroken sound of a breathing machine.